Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to a session recap. Well, actually, I'm going to do a little bit of New York yesterday, which was Tuesday, the 28th of June, and then primarily focusing on the London session as of today, so the 29th of June. So, higher time frames, let's have a quick look. So, you have to ignore some of the annotations on the chart, but essentially we're coming off this major or extreme weekly / monthly zone. So we know in the back of our minds there's a possibility that we can get that deeper weekly pullback. We've had a bullish change of character on the weekly chart and we're coming into the demand that caused that bullish chock on the weekly chart, just adding to some more confluence that we potentially could see that deeper move. Heading down to the daily chart, again, just try to ignore these annotations, but we are essentially trading between this swing high and this swing low. We've pulled back to premium supply, so there's a good argument that the pullback is now over and we're ready to take out the weak daily swing low. However, we did break some reasonably significant larger internal structure there to form that internal higher high. So there's a very good case that this could be the strong internal low that will hold for price to then continue that bullish internal structure to potentially mitigate some more premium supply that we have up here, or even this unmitigated pivot level there, right? And then once the larger internal structure then shifts bearish, now you have the internal structure aligned with the swing structure. It's much more likely then that the pullback is then over, and then we can expect the internal structure to stay bearish until it takes out that weak swing low, right? So that's kind of the bullish argument coming off that strong internal low that potentially we could see higher prices. But remember, swing structure takes precedence, right? It's much stronger than internal structure, and because we've had that pullback to premium supply, this could just be a short-term bounce here to kind of generate more liquidity, build those equal lows for price to ultimately come down and take out those weak lows, especially when you look at how impulsive that movement down was and then kind of how slow and corrective this pullback has been. It could just be to come into this level of supply, which we can see here on the daily, right, with these buy to sell wicks. Essentially, it's just a 4-hour supply zone. Corrective move into there. We've had that bearish eye chock there, right, and now we could be ready to have that sell-off. So it's not super clear. I can build a very good case for both, the bullish scenario and the bearish scenario. Lower time frames, as we'll take a look at in a minute, are both bullish on the 4-hour and the M15 for me. So, I'm just open to playing both sides, being a bit more aggressive in my management, and not really caring which way price wants to go, but just being aware of both possibilities really. Because if we take a look at the 4-hour chart, and this is kind of what I mean, I personally have the 4-hour chart as bullish because I view this as a significant swing pullback. We then took the low and then broke the high. So for me, that is the bullish 4-hour range. But this is where you can use a bit of nuance as a trader. Be a human. We're not necessarily algorithms, right? And this is where the benefit of being a human can come into play. Is we can also see that whilst the 4-hour may be bullish, if you map it this way, zoom out a little bit and we can see that's one big push down, and this could be that pullback into the supply level to then continue that movement there, right? And that's what I always have aware in the back of my mind. Yes, I am defining the 4-hour chart as bullish, but I'm also aware that you could just view this more as an IBOS rather than a swing boss, right? And that could be your swing pullback to then continue lower. So that's why I'm kind of open to trading in both directions at the moment. But let's just try and keep it nice and simple. Let's say we just view the 4-hour chart as bullish. We know that this is our swing high, this is our swing low. So ideally we want to be catching that higher low to continue the movement up. We had 2 attempts at trying to form that swing higher high, but both failed to close above, essentially sweeping these highs into that 4-hour level of supply. So during New York, we then came down into demand, and then we had that break to the downside, right, giving us that bearish chock on the 4-hour chart, but also with a decent amount of momentum. And this is where, again, you have to use that human element to read price action and the nature of price action. You can see overall it's been pretty corrective, starting to move up into that level of supply, and then that's quite an aggressive sell-off. We have a decent amount of sell side liquidity to target, so there's a pretty decent argument that we're probably going to come down at least into this strong 4-hour low here, right? So again, trying to keep it simple as possible. The 4 hours bullish. We failed to have a bullish break of structure, swing structure, because we need a candle closure. We've come into a level of 4-hour supply, and we've had a reasonably aggressive sell-off so far from that level. So at a minimum, I'd probably expect price is going to make its way down into this low. This is a strong 4-hour swing low, so then we can look for longs to potentially target that swing higher high and maybe come into this level or potentially higher, as that's the weak daily internal high, right? So that's kind of, the simple case. But the other thing I'm very, very open to, like I was saying, is that's the one strong push down. This can just be that pullback, right, to come into a level of supply. And now we're ready to potentially take out, these lows, these daily lows, right? And yeah, I don't really know what's going to happen. I'm open to both scenarios, outlining, areas of value in which, I'm happy to trade both directions from, i.e. I'm happy to look for longs from within here. I'm happy to look for sells from within here, right? And continue to follow that internal structure. So if you get quite a lot of conflicting biases, especially, which way is the daily going to go, which way is the 4 hour going to go, and you can make good arguments for either, just try, again, keep it simple and use the M15 as say your sort of, intraday direction in which you want to be trading. But in this scenario, this can be quite complicated as well because we have such a massive swing range. So I'm going to do my best to try and keep it simple, but whilst also digging into the internal structure, right? To have that more sort of advanced and deeper understanding of what's going on here. So first thing, always need to get right is where is our swing structure. Well, we previously had that as our swing high. I'll zoom out a little bit. And this was our swing low, right? So that was that one big swing push up on the M15. We then had that pullback, and then we eventually led to that bullish breaker structure here. So once we got that swing boss, this obviously then becomes our new swing low, right? So let's get rid of these orange circles. Cool, so we know where our swing structure is. That's kind of the most important thing. So that's the first range you want to really make sure you have nailed down. That's our swing high, that's our swing low. So from an M15 perspective, what can we expect after a swing break of structure? We expect a swing pullback, potentially then look for that swing high low to then target that swing higher high, right? Just from an M15 perspective, that's what we expect. So with New York yesterday, when we'd had that swing break of structure, and then I'll just show you the 4 hour chart, this is when we had then come into this 4 hour level of supply. So this was an area which I was pretty keen to look for shorts, to at a minimum just play the 4 hour and M15 pullback, right, where we could then get that high low and continue up, but also with the possibility that it could turn into that kind of pro daily trend move, right, where we could come down and actually take out these lows. So that's why this was a pretty good area to be looking for shorts, even though it was counter M15 and counter 4 hour swing trend. Especially with how correctively we were coming in, sweeping liquidity, etc., etc. This was a level I was pretty keen to get in short. However, if we look at the M15, generally after an M15 swing boss, generally the minimum I want to see is an M15 bearish change of character to then play that M15 pullback, right, to look for short. So we came into a level which I really liked. We came into an M15 supply within the 4 hour supply. Okay, perfect. But ideally, I want to see that M15 change of character. And for that to happen, this was the last fractal low. So that would have been the low that needed to go. Okay, and the whole way through London, basically around here, we hadn't taken out that low yet. So there wasn't really an opportunity for me to get short. Now, even if you didn't want to wait for an M15 shock and you're happy to look for the M1 entry short within here because we've hit M15 and 4 hour supply, let's just say you want to be a bit more aggressive and getting short, that's also cool. But for me, well, when price got here, this was 4:15 p.m. GMT, so kind of going towards the end of sort of that London New York crossover, session volume dying down. It's not really a time where there's going to be high probability entry. So if I'm going to want to take an aggressive setup, which would be a short against the 4 hour and M15 trend without even an M15 shock, I'm going to want to do that around New York session open or London session open, not so much here, okay? So for me, I'm not even going to dig into that, right? There is no opportunity for me to want to get short within my plan. We pull back through Asia, and then obviously this was the London trade where we're looking for potentially that internal structure just to continue sort of one more leg potentially up, which ends up not happening, which is cool. But the point I'm trying to make here is how could we have got into that short to capture that move from 4 hour supply, right? Because obviously that's a decent opportunity in which to get short, with high enough risk reward. But there's just, when I look back, there's nothing here that really meets my plan, especially if you're waiting for that shock. Once it happens and then sold off very, very aggressively. So then you have to wait until London today to kind of start to look for those entries. So yeah, I mean, at best as well, you could have, I'm open to looking for shorts from within here, even though, again, it's pretty aggressive because this supply did not break any structure in M15, right? It didn't break this low. This is one straight push up, so it didn't cause a shock. But again, let's say we want to be a bit more advanced. We love the level it's come off. We know this is still an area of supply, even though it's a weak area of supply. It's from a weak high, but maybe you want to be aggressive and get from within here. But then if I dive into the M1 and we look back around that time, that's this movement here, right? We come into that level of supply. There's no M1 entry, right? We shoot up, we shoot down. This is not the type of price action in which I'm going to be looking for shorts at this point. You're against the M15 internal structure. All right, if we look at the internal structure here, I'm just going to change the color in a minute so you can see it. So at this point, like you're basically trying to short against this movement, which is cool, but it's just, it's a lot lower probability. Make it a bit more. Trying to get in short from here against this, we don't even have the chalk, and that's why just keep it simple. Wait for an M15 chalk. Generally, the majority of you guys is what I'd recommend. Wait for an M15 chalk before you're going to trade against the M15 trend, which we didn't have. So yeah, there's just nothing really there that I think is worth really digging into to try and find an entry, or there's nothing there that I can see. And then once we got that aggressive sell off and we got the bearish IBOS, that's it. There was basically the point I'm trying to make here is there's nothing that met my plan. That I could have potentially caught that move to try and catch that next leg, which could turn into a big move, or at a minimum just trying to play the M15 and 4 hour pullback. So that's the point I was trying to make there. There's nothing that met my plan. Now let's kind of talk about what we're expecting for today, right, for Wednesday the 29th of June. Again, let's try and keep things super simple. So we know we've had the M15 bullish break of swing structure. So what do we expect after a bullish break of swing structure? We expect an M15 swing pullback, right, into the M15 strong swing low, right? So I'm not going to get complicated with everything we've done on the 4 hour and the daily and all of the expectations. Let's just try and keep it super simple with just the M15 and just use that framework alone, right? Swing breaker structure, we expect a swing pullback. The first sign that swing pullback could be starting, right, is the bullish change of character. But as you guys know, what's the framework that we now use? A change of character signifies we're going to get an internal pullback, or the start or the end of an internal pullback, but an IBOS signals the start or end of a swing pullback. Okay, so CHOC signals the internal structure is moving. IBOS signals the swing pullback is starting or ending. Okay, so once we get that CHOC, or more importantly, once we get the bearish IBOS, right, that's when we have decent confirmation now that we're getting that swing pullback. And what do we expect? We expect that those internal structures will hold until it takes out the previous start of that leg. Okay, so we had the bullish internal structure here, right, that movement there. Now once that switches bearish, this internal structure, what do we expect? We expect price then to stay bearish, the internal structure, until it takes out the start of that prior leg, the start of that bullish internal trend essentially. So now we've got that movement, right? And then this is what we expect that to continue potentially until it takes out that low. Sorry, my brain's melting a little bit here. But this is where it can get a little bit confusing, right, with internal structure. So this, what I was just mapping, is a smaller internal structure. Okay, these orange lines here, which we're now looking at, has given us nice swings, which we'll dig into in a minute for the London session. But we also have to be aware of the larger internal structures, right, where we have this movement here that led to that boss, right? That was one leg up. Then we have this pullback here, and then this is all one leg up, right? And then we got that bullish IBOS there. So now when you have the smaller structure within that, let's use a different color. Let's say the green structure. Okay, just going to map this quite roughly, but you guys know what I'm getting at, right? This structure here, right? So that stayed bullish to get that orange leg to the upside. So now once we get that IBOS, what do we expect? We expect the larger orange pullback. So then the green structure is going to shift bearish to facilitate that. So now what have we done is we've come into the strong orange internal low, right? Because that led to a break of the orange internal high. So this is technically a strong orange internal low, right? Which is pretty much a 1 hour swing structure. That's what we're looking at, but through the lens of the M15. So as we come into this level, this, can give you decent confluence to want to look for longs from within here, because they're like against the green internal structure, but they're with the larger orange structure, and obviously longs are with also the swing structure as well. So the point I'm trying to make here is this can give you a lot more confluence to look for longs from within here, right? Hopefully I haven't lost too many of you, but essentially you have the larger orange structure, which if it helps you, that's basically your 1 hour swing structure at the moment. Let's have a look actually. I don't want to make this too confusing, because obviously we don't really use 1 hour analysis in our okay, no, ignore me, it's not 1 hour swing structure because we never got a closure above that level there. But you guys get the picture, right? If you go on the 1 hour, you can see this is essentially the larger swing I'm trying to map there with the orange line on the M15. This is what I'm trying to get at, okay? From an internal structure perspective. If I'm confusing you with this, don't worry, just ignore this internal stuff, right? And we'll dig into the price action in a little minute, but hopefully for you guys who've gone through the advanced market structure module, this is making some sense. Hopefully I haven't lost you guys too much. So yeah, basically the point is we have this large orange internal structure, we come into that level, and this is technically a strong orange internal low. So as we're coming from within here, there's a decent potential that the green structure, let me just try and get this to draw, the green structure could now shift bullish, right? And then if that shifts bullish, then we'd expect the green structure to stay bullish until it takes out that weak high, right? So again, if I draw this with the orange structure, that's essentially how the fractal nature of price action will work. So we have the push up, and then the green structure shifts bearish to facilitate the orange pullback, and then the green structure could shift bullish to then facilitate that next pro internal trend leg on the orange structure, right? And that's all within, get the blue, the swing structure, push up, push down, swing push up, and then that could be the swing pullback, right, to then switch bullish. Okay. So for you guys who are comfortable with the advanced stuff on the advanced technical analysis module, hopefully that should make some sense. Now, let's dive into kind of the more recent price action, and again, we can keep it even more simple. We don't have to do this and be kind of aware of all of what's going on. So after a swing breaker structure, we expect a swing pullback, and then we can focus on kind of the clearer and nearer internal price action. So we have this push down, we then had that pullback, and then coming just kind of as Frankfurt was opening, we then got another bearish IBOS. And then at this point, you can kind of focus on this internal structure here, and we can focus on this recent internal structure and push it down and towards the extreme demand level, right? And then that's from this strong, this is the swing low, right? From that strong swing low, we can then start to look for longs to potentially try and catch that next swing pro trend swing move. Okay, so whether you want to wait for just a like as soon as price comes into here, you can look for an M1 entry. That's absolutely valid, right? It's pro M15 trend. Maybe you want to wait for a little bit more confidence and you want to wait for a chalk and then get in long here, right? So then at a bare minimum, you can play the internal pullback into this strong low, because then we could continue that movement down, but at least you're in early, right? You can remove your risk or even take partial profits. Or maybe you want to be even more conservative, and first you want to wait for the bullish IBOS, because it's once we get the IBOS that confirms the swing pullback is over, and now we're ready to get that next pro trend swing run. All right, so there's kind of 3 levels there. As soon as price comes into that extreme demand level, you can look for an M1 entry, the M1 entry model. Maybe you want to wait for a little bit more and you want to wait for that little M15 chalk, right? And then that can give you a bit more confidence, because at least that signals the internal pullback is happening, and at least then we can target the internal supply. Or maybe you want to wait for the actual IBOS, right? And that's kind of the most conservative way to then look for that move, to catch that move, to target that high there, right? Okay. So let's actually dive into the London session and see how we're approaching this. So at this point, kind of, as price was here sort of pre-Frankfurt, I have zero interest in shorts or longs, because we're kind of floating around the bottom of this low. We're not coming off any unmitigated demand, really. It just wasn't anything I was liking. So what I was really focusing on was looking for price to pull back up into this level here, right? It's essentially just trying to follow the internal structure, and I was hoping that price would come up into here during London. Then we could look for the shorts, then push this down lower into that demand zone. So that's basically what my simple and most primary thought was. Despite all of this complicated sort of analysis I've gone through and all of that, we can make it super complicated, or we could just say, right, I'm playing the swing pullback. The nearer internal structure is clearly bearish, right? I'm looking for, after that IBOS, for price to pull back into the supply, to then look for a continued quick move, right? Taking very heavy partials at this low, or even potentially full volume, to then look for the longs from within here. That was kind of my most simple analysis. Now, what I had aware in the back of my mind, but I wasn't initially paying too much attention to, was that this was the strong low of that larger structure. So, I knew that this could hold, but I wasn't really paying that much attention to it. There wasn't any unmitigated demand, right? We'd already had a tap into this level. I'm aware there can still be some demand within this wick, but it wasn't really anything that I was too conscious of. But this is when you can react to price as it starts to move, because as we then sold off into that level, and then we saw this aggressive push to the upside, okay, now I'm starting to think, well, maybe actually that larger internal low is going to hold. We've had a lot of momentum to the upside. We've then had that bullish change of character. So at this point, if I could bring back on bar replay, my mind is now thinking, okay, well, we've had a bullish chalk. So at minimum, right, potentially can play a longs just to push up into the premium internal supply, right? And then we can look for the shorts to continue that movement, right? And that's kind of how you can view the chalk. And chalk just signals the internal pullback could be starting. So you can look for a quick long up into this level if you want to take it. But what adds to maybe taking this, let's say, more aggressive trade is that, remember, it's coming from that larger internal low. So because we've had this movement here, draw a bit more accurately, and then we're coming down into that strong internal low, although we've just had a little chalk here, that could be the movement that leads to a bullish IBOS, right, to then get that next leg to the upside. So you have the up movement, the down movement, the up movement, the down movement. We're getting on the chalk, anticipating now that we're going to get that next movement, especially as it's pro-swing trend, right? So that's one way in which you can kind of say, well, maybe the risk reward is worth it at that point, right? Cool. So yeah, so then I was looking for a long from this demand level here to get involved, but it just didn't give the entry model that I was looking for. And then obviously by the time it gets up into here, I don't really want to be looking for longs anymore. And that was the end of the session. So it was a pretty slow session in terms of this is literally what it did for London. But that was the trade, really looking for quick longs to target the supply. And then I was looking for that move to then continue that internal structure, right? Because we assume that this strong high will hold until it doesn't. Whereas once that breaks, or if it breaks, then we can then try and catch that higher low, and we'd assume the internal structure will stay bullish until it takes out the weak swing high. So hopefully that makes sense, and that's literally just my thought process was for London. I'm a bit cautious as I'm kind of recording this and going through this, that like this way of trading can, especially if you're not kind of comfortable with the core concepts, this, I don't want to say unnecessary, but it almost is a bit unnecessary. You don't need to be mapping all of these large internal structures and the smaller internal structures, but if you feel comfortable with the core concepts, this can really just help you to give it a bit more confidence. But yeah, other than that, hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. If you're not looking at kind of those large internal structures and you're just focusing on the more of the clearer ones, that's also cool as well. You don't have to overcomplicate it. Just focus on this. I'm sure all of us can kind of see this. We get a bullish chalk, look for a long from within here to target this premium, take your heavy profits, and then look for shorts from within here to catch that next leg, right? And then keep following that internal structure until it shifts or until we come into the extreme demand. Then you can either get involved in the M15 chalk, playing it into here with the potential that we can continue down, but also with the potential that we can then shift bullish with the bullish IBOS. Once we get the bullish IBOS right, then we can hold with a lot more conviction that we can target the weak swing high. And that's really kind of, yeah, how you can keep it a lot more simple if you're finding it all a little bit overwhelming and unnecessary. But yeah, so we take a look at the M1. So literally, as it's kind of selling off through Frankfurt and London, I'm not interested, right? I'm not trying to trace this after, especially if we've had an IBOS become into demand. Like this is just nothing. I'm barely even looking at price. Once we then get that bullish chalk, okay, now it's a bit more interesting. We have the M15 demand that caused the chalk. Now looking to just play the move up into the sort of M15, let's say premium internal supply. So we have a straight big push up. Now I'm always a bit hesitant with these moves. I don't like them when you get one big straight push up, especially from a bit of unannounced. It was actually planned news. It was Spanish CPI. One straight push. There's no inducement in the leg, right? Typically, you want a little bit of a pullback, so we have inducement here. So I'm always a little bit skeptical, and ideally I'd like to see a bit more of a liquidity sweep with the recent price action as it comes into the M1 POI. So some liquidity is taken, right? And that's going to be a lot more ideal. So obviously you have the refined M1 POI nested within it as well, and then I'm also aware of the M1 demand range. Price literally just tapped into it, and then you have to be quick to see it, but we had that pullback there, then the movement down, so that's your bullish chalk. And then as soon as price comes back into that demand that caused the chalk, right, that's essentially your most basic entry. It's an M1 chalk from M15 demand, right? And then you can look to get long. If you took that 2 pip stop loss, wouldn't have tagged you in. Some of you I know don't use 2 pips, that's fine, and some distal you may have been tagged in. But yeah, in terms of the M1 entry model, it's as basic as it gets. Like this basically meets my plan, but it's the bare minimum criteria I need, which is an M1 chalk essentially from M15 POI, right? Whereas I was basically just waiting for a little bit more. I want to see something a little bit more convincing, like I just said, ideally an M1 sweep, or like at least an M1 flip, some sort of form of interaction, right, into the supply, and then that'll give you the flip. Something a little bit more obvious, because this was literally just a tap in, a quick chalk, and then it flew. Where maybe if we had to come down, let's say broken this level and then come back into here, right, then I'd be fine. That's a little bit more obvious. But at this point, it was a quick chalk, and then there was no other entry for me. And then by the time we got up here, taking these highs, we're near premium supply. It's the end of the session. We're just correcting sideways. Like, yeah, I'm not interested. I missed the move. It is what it is. And then we've come into the level of supply I was initially hoping we'd pull back to during London. But obviously this is out of session hours now after this level here, after 10 a.m. BST. So yeah, not interested in this. Let it chop around, and also it's getting a bit tight, right? You can see we have this fractal structure here, and you're essentially trying to trade into that now. So ideally this breaks like that and then gives us something like this, but you see how this is all just quite tight, messy range now. So it's not really ideal. Whereas ideally what you want to see is price come in, come up, or let's say like this, and then come all the way up. So then if you can get an entry within here, right, there's plenty of risk to reward for price to pull into this level in case that holds and continues to the upside. But now it's all just very tight and conflicting, and yeah, it's not great. So let's see how it shapes up for New York. Ideally we kind of clear this and move to the upside, but as of right now it's all just a bit of a mess. I don't really want to be trying to get in positions within here when it's all too tight and risk to reward isn't on our side. So yeah, again, I'm pretty hesitant. I don't know if this was my best explanation ever. I've kind of muddled my way through it a little bit, but hopefully for some of you who are more comfortable with the advanced internal structure aspects, it makes sense. For those of you who are more sort of towards, focus on a beginner trade plan, don't worry about this too much. Just focus on, those pro trend swing runs from the strong lows, right? And you can't go too wrong over a large sample size of trades. And if you want to bring some internal structure stuff into it, again, don't worry about if you can't see all the fractal larger ones. Just focus on kind of the more recent price action, right? Where we have these clearer, nearer internal ranges, and then just focus on this. And you can keep following it until it then changes. Once you then get that bullish IBOS, right? Now we have a nice clear trade. All the stars are sort of aligned, right? You have the internal structure clearly aligned with the swing structure, and these become the easier / higher probability trades, right? So yeah, I'll leave that there. I'm hoping I haven't lost too many of you with this. It wasn't my best explanation, admittedly, but yeah, hopefully you guys took some value from that, and I'll see you next one. Cheers, guys.